You wake up on a random Wednesday morning, you check your bank account, $187, rent is due in 5 days, credit card payment, tomorrow. Your car has been making that weird noise again. You already know what this means, not mechanically, financially. You start doing the math in your head. If I delay rent, if I pay minimum on the card, if I just ignore the car for a few more days. Every option feels like damage control. Nothing has actually gone wrong yet. But your entire day is already hijacked. Now run the exact same scenario again. Same morning, same car, same noise. But this time, your bank account says $24,300. You still don't like the sound. But you don't spiral. You just book a repair, go to work, and forget about it. Same problem. Completely different experience. Most people look at this and think the difference is discipline, or intelligence, or being good with money. It's not. It's position. Because money doesn't just solve problems, it changes how problems feel. And more importantly, it changes how profitable you are to the system around you. Here's what almost nobody explains clearly. Banks don't need you to be broke. They just need you to be slightly unstable, not bankrupt, not completely out of money, just close enough to the edge that every small problem becomes expensive. Let's slow this down, because this is where things get interesting. If you zoom out, most people aren't failing financially. They're surviving. Paycheck comes in, bills go out, maybe a little left over. Usually not. There's no margin, and without margin, every unexpected expense becomes a decision. And every decision has a cost. Car repair? You don't just fix it, you figure out how to pay for it. Credit card, loan, delay something else. And that's where the system starts making money. Let's make this very real. You have $400 in your account. A $420 charge hits. You go negative. Your bank charges you $35. You didn't buy anything extra. You didn't get a service. You just paid $35 for being slightly off. And if 2 payments hit, $70. 3, over $100, gone. Now zoom out again. Millions of people, small gaps, every month. That's billions in revenue. Now compare that to someone with $20,000 saved. That same $420 charge doesn't even register. No overdraft, no fee, no profit. For the bank, that's the first shift, and it happens quietly. The moment you build a buffer, you start breaking revenue streams. But overdraft fees are just the surface. The real money comes from something else. Desperation. When you don't have savings, time disappears. You can't wait. You can't compare options. You can't negotiate. You just need money. Now. So you take whatever is available, credit cards at 29% interest, short-term loans at ridiculous rates, payment plans that look small, but add up over time. Because the question isn't, is this a good deal? It's, can I survive this week? And that question is incredibly profitable. Now flip it again. You have $20,000 sitting there. Emergency happens. $2,000 problem. You don't borrow, you transfer. No interest, no fees, no urgency. That entire layer of profit just disappears. And this is where things get deeper, because the system isn't just built on money, it's built on behavior. When you're financially stressed, you don't think long term. You react, you take bad deals, you buy things you don't need because your brain wants relief. You say yes because saying no feels risky. Stress shortens your timeline, and short timelines are expensive. There's a concept in behavioral economics, scarcity mindset. When resources are tight, your brain focuses on immediate survival. Future thinking shuts down. Optimization disappears. You're not planning. You're coping. And coping is where most financial mistakes happen. Now here's the part people underestimate. When you cross a certain savings level, your psychology changes, not dramatically, subtly, but permanently. You stop rushing decisions. You wait, you compare, you walk away, not because you learned a new strategy, because you removed urgency, and urgency was the real problem all along. This is why that $20,000 number shows up again and again. Not because it's magical, because it's functional. For most people, it represents 4 to 6 months of expenses, which means, for the first time, you're not exposed to every small shock. You can absorb it, and that changes how you move through life. Below that number, you're playing defense, reacting, adjusting, surviving. Above it, you start playing offense. You think about investing, you think about opportunities, you think about growth, same income, different decisions. Let me give you something simple. Imagine your job is draining you. Bad boss, no growth. You know you should leave, but you have no savings. So you stay, because missing one paycheck breaks everything. Now imagine you have $20,000, same job, but now you have time. You can wait. You can search properly. You can even walk away if needed. Your boss didn't lose power. You gained leverage, and that's what this really is. Not savings, leverage. Money gives you distance. Distance gives you clarity. Clarity leads to better decisions, and better decisions compound quietly over time. This is the part most people miss. The goal isn't to feel rich. The goal is to stop being fragile, because fragility is what the system feeds on. And once you remove that, everything starts to change. But here's the problem. Getting there feels slow. Painfully slow. The first $1,000 feels like effort. $5,000 still feels small. Even $10,000 doesn't feel like much. It feels like nothing is happening. And this is exactly where most people quit. Not because it doesn't work, because it doesn't feel like it's working. But that's how the curve works. It looks flat right before it starts changing. And if you stop there, you never experience the shift. So the real question isn't, how do I get rich? It's much simpler. How do I get out of the zone where every small problem costs me money? Because once you do that, you're not just saving money, you're quietly stepping outside of how the system makes money from you. And that's where everything begins to change. Now here's where the story changes again, because once you cross that buffer, something subtle happens. Your life doesn't suddenly become luxurious. You're not buying expensive things. You're not quitting your job. From the outside, nothing looks different. But internally, everything feels different. The noise disappears. You stop checking your bank balance every few hours. You stop calculating every small purchase. You stop feeling that low-level anxiety that never really goes away. And when that noise disappears, something else shows up. Clarity. You start seeing things you couldn't see before. Bad deals become obvious. Unnecessary expenses become visible. Opportunities start to stand out. Not because the world changed, because your mind is no longer occupied with survival. This is the hidden upgrade. Not financial, cognitive, and it compounds in ways people don't expect. Let's take something simple. Buying a car. When you're living paycheck to paycheck, you don't really choose the car. You choose the payment. What can I afford monthly? That's the only question. So you end up locking yourself into a long-term commitment based on a short-term constraint. Now compare that to someone with savings. They don't ask, what's the monthly payment? They ask, what's the total cost? Completely different question, completely different outcome. And that difference can cost tens of thousands over time. This pattern repeats everywhere. Housing, insurance, subscriptions, even groceries. When you're stressed, you optimize for now. When you're stable, you optimize for total cost. And over years, that gap becomes massive. This is why two people with the same income can end up in completely different places. One is constantly reacting. The other is quietly optimizing. Same money, different behavior, different results. Now let's go one layer deeper, because this isn't just about decisions. It's about identity. At some point, you stop thinking of yourself as someone who is trying to save money, and you start thinking of yourself as someone who has money. That shift sounds small. It's not, because identity drives behavior. When you see yourself as someone who is always short on money, you act accordingly. You hesitate, you delay, you avoid. But when you see yourself as someone who has reserves, you act differently. You negotiate, you invest, you think ahead. Same person, different identity, different trajectory. And here's where it becomes interesting. Because once you reach this point, the system stops having easy access to you. You don't overdraft. You don't panic borrow. You don't carry balances. You don't rush decisions, which means you're no longer feeding the most profitable parts of the system. Again, not because you're smarter, because you're stable. And stability is rare. Most people never reach this point, not because it's impossible, because they underestimate the middle. That slow, frustrating, invisible phase where nothing feels like it's changing. Let me show you what that actually looks like. You start saving. $200 a month feels small. After a year, $2,400. Still doesn't feel like much. 2 years, $5,000. Better, but not life-changing. And this is where most people stop, because it feels like effort without impact. But what they don't see is that they're approaching the point where the experience changes. Not the amount, the experience. Because somewhere between $10,000 and $20,000, something clicks. Problems stop feeling like threats. They start feeling like inconveniences. And that shift is everything. It's the difference between panic and control, between reacting and deciding, between being pushed and choosing. And once you experience that, you don't want to go back. That's when saving stops feeling like discipline and starts feeling like protection. You're no longer building money, you're building distance between you and bad decisions. And that distance is what compounds. Because once you stop making expensive mistakes, everything else becomes easier. You keep more of what you earn. You invest more consistently. You avoid unnecessary debt. Not perfectly, but enough. And over time, that enough turns into something bigger. Now here's the final shift. The one that changes how you see everything. You realize the goal was never to make more money. It was to become harder to extract money from. That's it. Because the system doesn't just reward income. It rewards stability. And stability isn't built through big wins. It's built through small, consistent, boring decisions. Saving a little. Spending intentionally. Avoiding bad debt. Nothing impressive, but incredibly effective. So when people ask, how do I get ahead financially? They're usually asking the wrong question. The better question is, how do I stop falling behind every time something goes wrong? Because once you solve that, you're no longer stuck in the cycle. You're outside it. And from there, everything starts to work differently.